Let's start with a quote. "This fire has reached the public enemy stage, and it should be so regarded and treated by the public authorities. To hold that a state or county or other municipal division cannot provide protection to the lives and property of citizens threatened with destruction by fire would be to place the seal of impotency on government functions and to deny that protection the law should afford an enlightened people."
Can we get an artistic representation of the seal of impotency?
We'll work on that. These powerful words were originally written by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 1909 regarding a coal mine fire in Carbondale. However, the truth of these words cannot be denied and are just as poignant today as we watch in horror as Los Angeles burns. And despite these words, Pennsylvania abandoned a fire that had become public enemy number one in one rural mining town. In fact, this fire still burns today, more than 60 years after it initially started. Those of you that know the story of Centralia, Pennsylvania may wonder why we're covering it on a true crime podcast. But I submit to you that arson is not the only method by which a fire may be criminal. Often the ultimate results of a fire, accidental or intentional, are exacerbated by negligence, and in some cases, that negligence is criminal. You may know the story of Centralia, Pennsylvania, but you've never heard it like this, from the perspective of a fire protection engineer bringing you the science behind why the fire still burns after more than 60 years, and it may still be burning hundreds of years hence. But the true intrigue here lies in the question of whether anyone is at fault of either arson or criminal negligence, and the evidence may surprise you. We're going to lay it all out on the table and let you decide. Is the Centralia, Pennsylvania mining fire a crime? Let's get into it right now on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Captain Stoneburner, navigator of the uncharted podcast dimensions.
Please follow us on Instagram, YouTube, X, and maybe TikTok if it survives this weekend. And when you see content from us, leave us a comment and a like. Your comments don't even have to be related to the content. You can just say beans, or tell me what you had for dinner, or tell me a knock-knock joke. I will respond.
How do you spell gooch?
These interactions tell the algorithm that we are interesting people, and as a result, it will push us out to more people, and that's how we find our audience. And growing this podcast is a whole job in itself, so any effort you can put into helping us grow is so freaking appreciated that I cannot even adequately express it. Podcasting is not free, and we aren't asking for financial assistance, just your help growing. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your followers, tell your therapist, tell anyone and everyone, and that is the gift we truly need from you. If you do have some money to burn, you can always go and buy some of the new Crime to Burn merch and tell people about us without even opening your mouth. I've cut our profits down to just a couple bucks on each item, so hopefully you can find something that you can afford and that you'll love wearing and using in the case of accessories like mugs and water bottles and bags. We're on Spreadshop, and you can find the link to our website on all of our social media. If you have trouble finding it, just email me at crimetoburn@gmail.com and I'll send it to you. I would be more than happy to do that. You can also use that email address to send us constructive feedback, tell us your fire stories, suggest a case, or just say hello. We're still small. We don't have a staff, so every email and social media DM comes straight to me.
I have a staff.
Finally, if you'd be so incredibly kind as to leave us a 5-star review and written rating on all your podcast platforms and or subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be one of the most amazing gifts you could give us. Now, let's get to a town that definitely isn't raking in the 5-star reviews. Why? Well, because it's basically the portal to Satan's asshole. The entire town sits atop an insanely hazardous mine fire that's been burning for over 60 years. Imagine you buy a home, and suddenly Satan moves hell into your basement, and so you're at risk of falling into a surprise fiery sinkhole, or dying of carbon monoxide poisoning in your sleep. And if that doesn't take you, the long-term exposure to the toxic fire gases could always give you cancer and take you out via the long game. That's what happened to the residents of a small mining town in central Pennsylvania called Centralia. The entire town has been condemned. The zip code has been erased. The families have been evacuated except for a few exceptionally brave and stubborn holdouts. And the tragedy of what occurred in Centralia has become one of the most intriguing sagas of abandoned places in the United States. The formerly bustling town is now, for all intents and purposes, a ghost town, with signs dotting the landscape warning of severe danger and possible death to any urban tourists brave enough to explore the area. But before you head there to go check it out for yourselves, you should know that unlike many so-called ghost towns, this one has been largely demolished. The structures that make many of these types of abandoned towns so intriguing to explorers, they don't exist in Centralia. They were all torn down. The landscape has been overtaking what's left of the man-made urban pathways that once ushered people to schools, churches, and shops and homes, all long ago demolished. The forest is reclaiming its birthright with a lush foliage topcoat hiding the absolute hellscape, complete with fire and brimstone lurking just below the ground. The thin wisps of smoke wafting up through natural vents in the earth act as persistent reminders that in 1962, the government did not provide the protection to the lives and property of citizens threatened with destruction by fire, ultimately placing the seal of impotency on local, state, and federal agencies as warned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court way back in 1909.
Can I get a stamped version of that seal that I can put on foreheads?
I'll work on one. Some of those agencies we still depend on to this day for our protection and safety.
You might.
Yeah. See, that's why I paused. As we explore the events that culminated in one of the biggest ecological disasters in the United States, we will be discussing evidence unearthed by authors and independent investigators in the decades since Centralia was abandoned by the elected officials charged with protecting its residents. And in those explorations, we will suggest that there may have been some negligence, perhaps even criminal negligence, or even arson that played a role in the magnitude of this disaster. But that's all it is. Suggestion, question, and suspicion. So let's slap a big fat allegedly across all the language herein that may sound accusatory. The truth is that these are not theories born of my own mind and intuition, but they are based on decades of research by others, and my complete source list is in the show notes. And as always, if anything I say here is incorrect based on your knowledge, you're always welcome to reach out to us at crimetoburn@gmail.com. And we will talk conspiracy, so get your tinfoil hats ready, because I don't think we can ignore the possibility, however remote it may be.
I have a tinfoil fedora.
You're going to be styling and profiling. Was there malicious intent here? I doubt it, but I encourage you to make your own determination and let me know what conclusions you draw. And before we move on, it's worth noting that the 2006 film Silent Hill, in which an abandoned town sits atop a mine fire populated by monsters and demons, was influenced by Centralia, and this has been confirmed by screenwriter Roger Avery, according to the sources I read.
That's cool. I have not seen that.
I haven't either. It's a 2006 movie. We should see if we can watch it later.
Nothing good came out in 2006.
Okay. Now, coal was the reason Centralia existed, and it sustained the town for nearly a century. And ultimately, coal, anthracite coal to be exact, was the demise of Centralia also.
What's the difference between, what'd you say?
Anthracite coal.
What's that?
I'm going to explain. Anthracite coal, often called black diamond, is coal of an exceptionally high carbon content. It shatters like glass, setting it apart from the types of coal mined in West Virginia and other parts of Appalachia. And Centralia's coal basin was basically a black gold mine. As mines opened in the area, people came. They settled, and the town of Centralia was born. By the end of the 1800s, over a dozen mines were in operation in the area, and hundreds of men and boys worked to haul the riches up to the surface where they could line the pockets of wealthy businessmen that owned the mineral rights. Now, I'm going to go more into specifically what anthracite is later when we start talking about the fire, but basically it's elsewhere in Appalachia they have bituminous coal, and in Centralia they have anthracite.
I think that's what I'm familiar with, and I was trying to...
Bituminous?
Yeah. Even though I don't really know what that is.
I'm going to explain that too, because I have to explain why this fire is so hard to put out. However, these companies were not immune to the stock market crash of 1929 that led into the Great Depression, and as miners found themselves out of work because businessmen shuttered the mining operations, Many of these unemployed miners became bootleg miners because the demand for anthracite, while still depressed, did exist through the Great Depression. And while the market for anthracite had brief resurgences, ultimately in 1950, towns just like the once prosperous Centralia found themselves cash-strapped as tax revenues and job opportunities for residents dried up, and the town's operating budgets dried up with them. By this point, mined coal veins crisscrossed unseen beneath the town's landscape, hollowed out caverns still rich with anthracite. Many of these caverns had pillars of anthracite left in place to act as structural support to prevent the mine ceilings from caving in. However, during the desperation of the Great Depression, as these unemployed miners, desperate to feed their families, turned to illegal bootleg mining, many of them disregarded concerns like structural stability in order to obtain the readily available stores of anthracite in these pillars. And decisions like this would be just some of a series of bad decisions that would ultimately doom the town and its residents.
Like the dwarves, their greed of mining was their undoing.
The doors?
The dwarves.
Oh, the dwarves.
Not Jim Morrison. He was not a
I was
miner,
so
though.
Confused. So what dwarves are we talking about?
Like Tolkien dwarves.
Okay, I didn't know they were miners.
Who mines the ground, who digs the things out of the earth and makes the metals and is obsessed with mining? Dwarves.
I didn't know.
I thought everyone knew this.
I'm sorry. Sorry to disappoint you.
I don't even think you're real.
The Centralia mine fires began in 1962. At first a surprise, then a nuisance, then a growing concern, until 1980, with nearly 20 years of coexisting with the fires burning beneath their homes, many residents were still somehow completely ignorant to just how precarious their situation had become. That is until one fateful Valentine's Day in 1981, when the residents realized that the ground they'd built their lives upon could swallow them up whole. That was the day 12-year-old Todd Domboski almost became the first victim of the Centralia mine fire. It started with a flat tire on Todd's motorcycle, according to Joan Quigley, author of the book The Day the Earth Caved In, An American Mining Tragedy. I presume she meant dirt bike, but she said motorcycle. But remember, Todd's only 12. Todd's cousin was trying to repair the tire with a hot patch when Todd noticed a wisp of smoke coming from the ground in his grandmother's yard. He immediately feared that he and his cousin had somehow started a fire, and he went to investigate. As he approached the area, the ground beneath his feet gave way, sinking into the earth and taking 12-year-old Todd with it. Before he could react, he was buried to his knees and then his waist. He tried to scramble backwards up the rapidly disappearing ground at his back, and his hands sank into the liquefying mud until it gave way, dropping Todd into a cavity that had opened, releasing a noxious plume of hot sulfurous gas as Todd's fingers found purchase on the roots of a tree.
Jesus.
He clung as the ground continued to give way, and suddenly he could see fire beneath him, the whooshing sound of an oxygen-deprived fire suddenly receiving an influx of oxygen following the opening of the earth beneath Todd's feet, and he screamed for help. His cousin heard Todd's screams and looked up to see an ominous plume of steam pouring from the ground. His cousin Eric ran to the edge of the newly opened chasm, laid down in the dirt on his belly to peer down at the hole, which was only about 2 feet wide, and roughly 6 feet below him he could see Todd. He reached down and Todd reached up, and the boys strained to reach each other, and finally Eric was able to pluck Todd out of the earth and return him to safety. Todd was physically okay, but the shock of being swallowed by the earth left him badly shaken, and I'm assuming traumatized for life. And the town of Centralia could no longer pretend that the mine fires weren't a problem, weren't their problem. But how did the fire even start to begin with? Well, it seems that would be another series of unfortunate decisions. Some involved a lack of regard for regulations. Some may have involved shoddy workmanship. Some may have even involved people intentionally looking the other way when problems were brought to their attention. And we have a word for that: negligence. And when a crime occurs because someone was negligent, that would be criminal negligence. Is it a crime to disregard obvious risks to human life or safety? Yes. Yes, it is. So is what occurred in Centralia a crime? Like I said, I'll let you decide. There are several theories about what started the fire. Some hold more water than others. One, presented in the book Fire Underground, The Ongoing Tragedy of the Centralia Mine Fire by David de Kock, is the most compelling to me.
Is that like a title or his name?
That's his name. It's D-E-K-O-K.
Okay.
And it's actually a really good book. I highly recommend it. However, I am going to present you with all of the theories. If the theory, which is backed up with sources in de Kock's book, is what actually happened, it's not a far reach to get to criminal negligence and possibly even arson.
It's just around the corner.
So according to de Kock, and this seems to be the most widely accepted theory based on my research, this all started because of a Memorial Day celebration. Remember how I discussed that mining towns like Centralia were becoming financially strained as more and more mines closed down operations?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the town didn't have a lot of cash for building landfills, and with illegal dumps being an issue due to the smells and rat infestations they attracted, the town needed a legal landfill solution.
And a Pied Piper.
And it just so happens that there was an abandoned strip mine right there near the cemetery. A strip mine is basically just a big open mining pit. It was big, it was deep, and it was wide, and people were already dumping their trash in there anyway. If they made it a legal landfill, they could regulate it. Win-win. So they applied for the proper permits, and an inspector came out to review the site. Now, this was not the first town to turn a strip mine into a landfill. It was done so commonly that there were laws and regulations in place to ensure it was constructed properly. This was actually because landfills and strip mines had a dark history of starting mine fires. So it was required by state law to have inspectors come and review the planned project and also to do regular inspections. The regional landfill inspector showed up and he told the town council that they couldn't use the strip mine until they addressed some holes in the walls of the pit and filled them in with non-combustible material. The reason this was necessary was because these holes provided a channel between the open pit strip mine and the underground mining tunnels. And landfill fires are not that uncommon, so it was required to ensure that these openings were sealed off to prevent any landfill fires from becoming an underground mine fire. The city council was informed of the holes and they signed a contract to have them sealed. Now, we don't actually know if the inspector returned to re-inspect the site after the work was performed or if he just rubber stamped it after being told it was done, but either way, he issued a permit, and beginning in early 1962, this new legal landfill was open for business. But there was still a problem. Rats and smells, the same issues that they'd had with the illegal dumps, were plaguing the new landfill, and the town had a way of dealing with bad smells and rats from refuse piles. Fire. They would burn the refuse piles, and the fire department would stand by and then extinguish the fire. And with the upcoming parade for the Memorial Day holiday, the town readily agreed in a council member meeting to light that sucker up. Although it wasn't recorded like that in the meeting minutes. Why? Well, it seems that the town may not have wanted anyone to know that they had intentionally started a fire that ultimately destroyed an entire town, especially because it was against state law to set dump fires at this time. However, receipts were found paying for the firefighters that worked standby for the fire. There's even a note in the town meeting minutes about paying for someone to be there with their front end loader to help move the refuse around during the fire so they could more effectively burn it. Townspeople later attested that yes, they had burned trash that day. There was absolutely a fire, and that this was a regular occurrence and it didn't seem that unusual. Now, once the fire had burned long enough to supposedly handle the rats and odor, the fire department personnel extinguished the fire and went home. And everything seemed kosher until 2 days later when someone walking in the adjacent cemetery noted that the dump was on fire again and called for the fire department to come extinguish it. But a week later, it was on fire again. Finally, the council hired a bulldozer for the fire company to use so that they could move the refuse around and get the water deeper into the pile, hopefully attacking the fire at its seat. But no such luck. As they moved the refuse around, they made a shocking discovery. There was a hole at the base of the north wall of the pit that had been concealed under trash and dirt, and it had not been filled in with non-combustible material. And that hole led into the maze of underground coal tunnels that zigzagged through the region. The fire department put out the fire again, but it was smoldering again in days as the realization dawned that this wasn't just a trash fire anymore. Fire had spread into the adjacent abandoned mine passage. And that was going to be a much bigger problem. So let's review. Number 1, we were required by law to seal up the holes. Was this really missed, or was it ignored? We were required by law not to light the dump on fire, but we did it. That's how we'd always done it. Silly regulations. Regulations are for kids. If the inspector returned and inspected the wall after the holes were sealed up, how did he miss this one? Did he really return? Or did he just take somebody's word for it and rubber stamp the permit? And then finally, arson is usually defined as the malicious and intentional burning of property. And the city council intentionally had set the fire, allegedly. But it wasn't necessarily malicious. Unless you were one of the rats that lived in the dump, then it's probably malicious. So it's probably not arson, right? Not so fast. You see, I looked up the definition of arson in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania's definition of arson does not require malicious intent. It can be recklessness in lieu of malicious intent.
So you can be an arsonist in one place, but not necessarily in another.
So here's the word-for-word definition from the Pennsylvania Code. The Pennsylvania Code reads, quote, "A person commits a felony of the first degree if he intentionally starts a fire or causes an explosion, or if he aids, counsels, pays, or agrees to pay another to cause a fire or explosion, whether on his own property or on that of another, and if he thereby recklessly places another person in danger of death or bodily injury, including but not limited to a firefighter, a police officer, or other person actively engaged in fighting the fire."
You know, now that you said that, I don't think I can ever go back to Pennsylvania.
Now, we all know that I'm not a lawyer. I get my legal advice from Google. But if the city council paid the fire department to have the dump fire, that sure sounds a lot like recklessness since it was against the law. And they ended up having to abandon an entire town because of the risk of death. So that is starting to sound real arsony to me. So is this why the city council didn't note in the minutes that they'd arranged to have the fire department do the burn, and it was only uncovered later by finding receipts where they paid the firefighters that were on duty that day? I mean, if the foot protection device conforms to thine foot, if the shoe fits.
Oh.
What?
I thought you were quoting Second Bolognians.
So potentially 2 broken laws at a minimum, and possibly a contractor that didn't do the job he was paid to do or didn't do it completely. Possibly an inspector that didn't do his job, and you see why I say we're dangerously close to criminal negligence. And then we add in the really strong argument in my non-legal expert opinion that this could meet the definition of arson, and it's starting to feel a lot like a crime. So crime or not, we have a mine fire, so what now? Now, when I was a firefighter, I remember there was this joke where they would ask potential officer candidates like a super insane question about how you would handle a scene in which everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Like additional fires are starting in adjacent houses while a car crash happens in front of you, the fire truck's ladder fails and falls on the chief's car, the woods catch fire from power lines, there's a lightning storm rolling in, everything that could go wrong. And sort of the joke answer is remove uniform, mingle with crowd. And it's a joke, but it's kind of similar to what the city council did here. Now, in 1962, when the Centralia mine fire started, there were 2 organizations that the local government could turn to for help. The Pennsylvania Department of Mining and Mineral Industries, or DMMI for short, and the U.S. Bureau of Mines, which is part of the Department of the Interior. Now, these organizations were primarily concerned with policing active mines to ensure that safety regulations were being followed. But in the event of a mine fire, these inspectors would ensure that the mine owners took responsibility for extinguishing the fire, and extinguishing a mine fire was no small task. In 1859, Lehigh Navigational Coal Company began fighting one such mine fire, and they would spend the next 80 years and $2 million fighting that fire. But the role of these regulatory organizations wasn't the active firefighting. It was basically to act in a mostly advisory manner. In fact, despite that 1909 statement from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court clearly articulating that the government should step in where mine fires aren't being controlled by mine owners or in abandoned mines, the General Assembly didn't actually pass any laws requiring this of any organization. So if a mine owner didn't have the resources to fight a fire, there wasn't any law under which to force them or anyone else to actually take action. So what happened if a mining company goes broke before they've accomplished their responsibility of extinguishing a hazardous mine fire? In these cases, it was expected that the municipality or county would be left footing the bill. And that is where the quote that we opened this episode with came from. One such mining company ran out of funds before it had extinguished the fire, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that it was a function of the government to protect lives and property of the citizens. So in cases where the fires outlasted the bank accounts, the responsibility for fighting the fires landed squarely on the shoulders of government and ultimately taxpayers. However, what about those fires that occurred in abandoned mines? Without a company to pin the responsibility on, it would be up to the municipality and the DMMI to bridge the gap. The problem is that following World War II and the demise of the anthracite coal industry, the entire state budget allocated to abandoned coal mine services available in 1962, when this fire began, was just shy of $1.5 million. And that money was intended not just to fight abandoned mine fires, but to also help in cleanup projects and projects that prevented the acidic mine water from reaching water sources, anti-subsidence programs, which is where they take action to prevent or correct what's essentially like sinkholes or depressions that result from abandoned mines that cave in. And so to give you an idea of the scope of the problem compared to that $1.5 million budget, by 1985, the estimated number of projects remaining was estimated to require at least $15 billion.
That's a lot of tacos.
So $1.5 million is not going to cut it, especially since we're dealing with a state that actually had other mine fires that occurred during the same time period. In fact, that's my next sentence. And this wasn't the only area dealing with mine fires. However, the other areas of the state dealing with those mining fires were much wealthier and politically weighty, areas like Wilkes-Barre and Scranton. And they just had a lot more political pull. Now, beginning in 1954, laws were passed allowing Congress to appropriate up to $500,000 a year to fight mining fires. But bafflingly, to qualify, the mine had to be inactive and threaten a sufficient quantity of coal reserves. But there was no provision for a fire threatening a community. We see where your priorities were, Congress. And even when a jurisdiction qualified, they were not guaranteed the full funding. Instead, funding was not decided by the scope of the disaster, but by how much money was available and how much political pull the jurisdictions had. And even if they got some or all of the available funding, there was no guarantee that the funding would be extended year after year, so many mine firefighting operations were begun, but because they're multi-year operations, they would run out of money in subsequent years when they didn't get funding. But why are mine fires so difficult to fight? Well, to understand that, we have to understand the physics of a mine fire.
It's because you can't see a mine fire. It's underground.
That doesn't help.
You can't fight what you can't see.
Now, we know that to have fire, there's really 4 things that have to be present. We call these the fire tetrahedron. Now, you probably learned it as the fire triangle, which is heat, fuel, and oxygen.
I did.
But there's a 4th element, and that's chain reactions. But a fire is a self-sustaining reaction, and it generates heat, which vaporizes fuel, which allows the fire to propagate. And if you can interrupt those chain reactions, you can stop the fire.
Does that mean we could stop the sun?
I don't know. But that's why it's a tetrahedron and not a triangle. But the concept is the same. So for simplicity, we're going to focus on the 3 you're most familiar with: heat, fuel, and oxygen. Now, the fuel we know in this case is anthracite coal. What's unusual about anthracite coal is that it's actually much more difficult to ignite than bituminous coal, which is the type of coal mined throughout most of Appalachia. Anthracite coal has more carbon and less volatile matter, so anthracite is 86 to 97% carbon, while bituminous coal is 45 to 86% carbon.
I had to wait a long time for that answer, I feel like.
I'm working on it. I'm going to give you even more answers. I'm going to give you so much information, it's going to be worth the wait.
I want my head to swell up like a fat deer tick.
Now, anthracite is hard and brittle, while bituminous coal is hard and friable. As a result, anthracite burns more efficiently and cleanly than bituminous coal. Anthracite coal can burn at much higher heats than bituminous coal. It requires roughly 900 degrees Fahrenheit to ignite it, but the fire can burn at around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is considerably higher than bituminous coal, which produces fire temperatures around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's like fire in ceramic temperatures.
Meaning that once an anthracite fire starts, it's capable of producing more than enough energy to propagate. and it produces between 13,000 and 15,000 BTUs per pound, which is about twice that of wood.
Yeah, baby.
Plus, it burns longer than other types of coal or wood. And anthracite's high carbon content makes it a good candidate to produce hydrogen. What? Hydrogen? The volatile gas that caused the Hindenburg explosion? Yes, that hydrogen.
The same hydrogen that's in water.
Yeah, but it's not a gas in water. It's hydrogen gas that likes to go boom.
Maybe it's not in your water.
Now, this is a little science nerd, but the basic formula for gasification of coal, which produces hydrogen, is that we have burning coal, which is a combustion reaction, requires air, and the result is heat and carbon dioxide. And then we have more carbon from the coal and the carbon dioxide reacting to form carbon monoxide. And then the carbon monoxide reacts with steam, and the result is hydrogen and carbon dioxide. Now, hydrogen is really boomy. But this makes coal fires, especially in a confined mine, even more challenging because this hydrogen gas can actually travel to areas remote from the fire and build up. And then once it's heated, you can get an explosion remote from the fire and can start a whole new fire away from the seat of the earlier fire.
Now it's sentient and thinking about where it's going to ignite.
I don't know that it's sentient, but it's definitely dangerous.
That's how I'm going to think of it.
So not only do we have plenty of fuel inside the mine, but we have fire generating new and more dangerous types of fuel as it burns. And the reason it's so hard to ignite anthracite is because it requires a very high temperature to ignite. But put the fire in a tunnel and you have lots of surfaces for the heat to radiate to and absorb, and it's really not hard to heat that fuel up and for that fire to propagate now. Plus, as it heats up anthracite ahead of the fire, it liberates the inherent moisture from the anthracite, which will result in the production of steam, which is what we need to cause the gasification of coal into hydrogen. So we have fuel. We have a lot of fuel. We even have fuel that can get creative and produce more volatile, different kinds of fuel. And we have heat. So there's two sides of the fire triangle. And the heat is one that we're most adept at overcoming. We put water on fires. Boom, no heat, we put out the fire. But as I mentioned in that chemical reaction discussion, steam helps a coal fire create hydrogen, and we're not in a big open space where gases like hydrogen can just dissipate. We're in a confined space. And there are reports of coal mine fires where they flooded the entire mine shaft and left it flooded for extended periods of time. And even after they pumped the water back out, the fires would reignite because the heat would be so deep in the coal that it would then be able to absorb oxygen from vents in the earth and reignite and then work its way back up to the surface. So if water isn't the best way to extinguish a coal fire, can we eliminate the heat by using a really large heat sink? Now there's lots of things that make really good heat sinks for most fires. Things like rocks, sand, dirt, earth. Wait, you see the issue here? We're in a mine. We've already got those things. They're not overcoming the heat of this fire, so this is no dice. There's just not enough heat sink material down there to absorb the mass quantities that these coal fires can produce.
Is that why? Because there's not enough heat sink? Really? Whatever's around it, it's not acting as a heat sink. I mean, it might be, but it's not affecting the fire.
And you're right. There is the possibility that they can pump enough material in there that they could create a big enough heat sink to put out the fire. I'm not denying that. But it's not an easy task. I mean, think about, it's easy to pump water.
Nothing worth doing is easy.
But it's really hard to pump rocks and sand and dirt. So if we can't eliminate the fuel and we haven't succeeded at eliminating the heat, that leaves us oxygen. And many people wonder how the coal manages to sustain combustion in a mine tunnel anyway. Well, we built all these great entrances to the tunnels and hollowed them out and interconnected them. And oh yeah, the mine would flood occasionally, so we also built a huge drainage channel that provides more than enough oxygen to flow into the mine to sustain combustion. But even if we closed up the drainage tunnel, the earth is not solid. There are rock fissures and caves and all kinds of openings, and ideally we would know where all the man-made openings are from mining permits and such and can potentially close them off. But remember how I talked about all those bootleg miners? Yeah, they dug any number of undocumented coal holes throughout the region, and many of them are now overgrown, and finding all of them would be impossible. And even if you could plug every man-made hole, the fire will find natural vents in the earth. Okay, so I've told you we have way more fuel than we can eliminate. We have more heat than we can reasonably eliminate, and we have no way to control the oxygen to the fire. So how do we put the fire out? Well, that's why we haven't put it out. The best way to handle a coal fire like this is to head it off and dig out the area ahead of the fire, removing its future fuel. So basically it hits a wall where there's just no further to go.
Like a backfire theory.
And the truth is that coal fires don't move that fast in most cases. But it requires expediency to get ahead of it. And that's something that we missed out on in Centralia, expediency. And there are reasons we missed out on it. Big, governmenty reasons.
Big, hairy reasons.
Reasons that might be negligent, possibly. And we're going to talk about them next week on Crime to Burn. Sound effect cat has arrived.
I don't know if you can tell, but I've basically claimed this couch for my junk.
Because your junk's that big. It needs a whole couch.
Ba-dum-ching.
That's stupid, but I get it.
I don't get it. You ever just feel perpetually dumb?
All the time.
I feel like the whole world's in on a joke I don't get.
You saved an insurance guy from a bear.
He wasn't like in any peril.
No. And you know, this is going to be the story that this guy tells at like every dinner party and like cocktail hour and stuff, happy hour he goes to. And for us, it was just Thursday.
It wasn't as weird as he thought it was. I didn't want to take his snacks.
Did you give him a card about the podcast?
No. Man, I just thought he was traumatized enough. Didn't need any extra on the way home. You need to listen to something nice, like some deep beat. We're gonna look like two monkeys in a football, but no, wrong movie. I think we've all seen Nothing But Trouble.
There's no Demi Moore in my story. I'm very delicate.
You're so squishy. That's adorable. Well, if you watched the whole movie, you would realize his nose wasn't real. So he had to have that molded, and I wonder what they use as a reference.
Did you hear about the woman that had a lot of trouble with her MRI recently?
Guess not. It's not ringing a bell.
She confirmed that she didn't have any metal on her body or in her body. But as soon as they started the MRI, she started screaming that she was in agonizing pain. It turns out that the rubber she decided to wear to her MRI had a metal core.
It wasn't just like, I need my security.
My emotional support. What could we put in a break in case of emergency jar at the bar? What would be our emotional support object? Do they make shelf-stable cheese? I don't like whipped cream very much, but there's something really appealing about squirting Ready Whip in your mouth. I just really like it. Now there's Ready Whip in the fridge. I've partaken a bit.
And I like that about you. See, the real world's different than the virtual world.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the real world, if there was an actual corpse, I'd be like, I'd have to stop.
That's a problem.
I'd stop for a minute and make sure it was a corpse and see if I could render aid.
Enjoy the soothing sounds of
cat retching.
Cat retches.
All right, business time.
I got my business socks on. Tell your followers, tell your therapist, tell anyone and everyone that...
Tell your therapist for sure.
Ultimately placing the seal of impotency.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, their women have beards. Is what happens every day at Whole Foods a crime?
Oh, possibly. If the theory, which is backed up with sources in DeCock's book, is what actually happened, it's not a far reach to get to criminal negligence and possibly even arson. I'm going to take every opportunity to say his name.
How unfortunate. Oh, I'm such a child. Sounds like a title.
Should I retake that last sentence or just go with it?
Let's retake it and you can decide.
However, I'm going to present you with all the theories. If
Oh, man. Will we ever grow up?
no. It's not a far reach to get to criminal negligence.
You chose these words. Some sick part of you chose them on purpose. Just reach right around. Oh, man. Reach around for the cock.
So according to DeCock,
You can't even do it. You got to take some Quaaludes or something.
it was big, it was deep, and it was wide.
Some of them were tickling the edge of it.
And everything seemed honky-dory until 2 days later.
Did you say honky-dory?
I did.
Was that on purpose?
Yeah, I actually wrote hokey-dory, but I meant honky-dory.
Is it honky?
Isn't it? Honky-dory?
I don't know. I thought it was hunky.
Hunky-dory?
Yeah.
Like the dory's really buff?
And calls everyone bro. Yeah.
I'll just try a different word.
I really don't think it's honky.
Okay.
I do.
Fire had spread into the adjacent abandoned mine. Yeah.
My mail. I know what happened, I think. They found an entrance to the inner earth where there's an inner sun and like everything goes around it, you know. But then the government found out that you could get there from here. And they were like, we can't exist without your taxes. And if you find the inner earth, you're not going to be a taxpayer.
It's going to have to be a really big...
Well, I'm not judging. I don't think that's going to be helping the situation.
Either.
You going to go after him? What are you trying to do?
Let's go arrest the people that are probably dead.
You did this. I'm coming for you. I feel disappointed right now.
Oh.
You're the scientist. Never underestimate the fantastic potential of an ever-burning fire. I was trying to think of what else we could get to burn that long. I can't feel my spine right now.
I can't feel...
I think that might be dangerous.
But if I ever come across a good sale on some cushy bar stools...
If I ever do that, I'm going to get arrested.
Why? A good sale on some cushy bar stools?
If I what to it?
Oh.
Oh, boy.
It's always an joke.
You love the jokes in your ear holes. Shinshi.
I'm not Googling that.
I am. I'm Googling it right fucking now. We need to work on your fucking exposure to the real world. I don't even know how to spell that.
She wanted to try Shinshi. The ear canal.
Well, there you go. Now I know.
You should have known.
I should have known. All right, I'm going to stop recording because my butt's asleep and I got to stand up.
You want me to give your butt artificial respiration?
No. Mm-mm.
I want to put some butter on it.
I think this is a good place to end.